Welcome to episode 177 of Informed Choice Radio, where I speak to Ann Pettifor.
One of the reasons why our financial system is subjected us to recurring crises and still ongoing financial crises, if I may say so, is because there is a basic misunderstanding, and sometimes I think it's a deliberate misunderstanding of the nature of money. The great thing about our monetary system, if our monetary system was based on gold, we would have to restrict the amount of activity in the economy to the amount of gold in the vaults of the banks.
From Sundial House Studios in Cranley, welcome to Informed Choice Radio. This is the podcast all about achieving your financial goals in life. Here's your host, Martin Bamford.
What is money? Where does it come from? And who controls it? These are the questions answered in the new book from my guest on the podcast today, leading political economist Ann Pettifor. Ann is a UK-based economist, director of policy research in Macroeconomics, Prime, an honorary research fellow at the Political Economy Research Centre at City University London, and a fellow of the New Economics Foundation. She is also executive director of the consultancy Advocacy International, which advises governments and organisations on international finance and sustainable development. Ann is best known for correctly predicting the global financial crisis in several publications, including Coming Soon, The New Poor, and also her 2006 publication, The Coming First World Debt Crisis. Ann's background is in sovereign debt. She was one of the leaders of the Jubilee 2000 debt campaign, which succeeded in writing off $100 billion in debt, in nominal terms, owed by 35 of the poorest countries. Her new book is The Production of Money: How to Break the Power of Bankers. In this book, Ann argues that democracies can reclaim control over money production and subordinate the out-of-control finance sector to the interests of society and also the ecosystem. In this episode of Informed Choice Radio, I speak to Ann about what money really is, the fundamental issues with the money system, what happens if nothing changes, whether we can still trust economists, if women are better positioned than men to control the money system, and the rise in the popularity of gold. You can find the show notes, full transcript, and useful links for this episode at icradio.co.uk. If you enjoy listening, and I hope you do, please do let me know on Twitter at Martin Bamford. Please also say thank you to Ann on Twitter, where you can find her at Ann Pettifor. I would also massively appreciate your review of this podcast on iTunes. Visit icradio.co.uk/iTunes to leave us a review, and we will, of course, read it out in a future episode. Welcome to The Production of Money with Ann Pettifor in episode 177 of Informed Choice Radio. So I'm delighted to be joined on the podcast today by Ann Pettifor, and welcome to Informed Choice Radio.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Can I start by asking then, your new book, which is The Production of Money, addresses some really important questions about the money system as a whole. So can we start with the basics? What is money? What is money really?
Here we go. Well, that is a really big question, but it is a pretty fundamental one. And for me, one of the reasons why our financial system has subjected us to recurring crises and still ongoing financial crises, if I may say so, is because there is a basic misunderstanding, and sometimes I think it's a deliberate misunderstanding of the nature of money. So money is a social construct. It's based on promises. I promise to repay at a certain time and a certain rate of interest. And it is as a social construct, it's upheld by our social institutions. I promise to repay is held up by our criminal justice and judicial system, which makes sure that I honor my contract. The money in which I pay, the money of account, if you like, or the currency, is upheld by the central bank, which in turn depends on the taxation system for upholding the value of the currency, because it does so by ensuring that all tax liabilities are paid in that currency, and that's what gives a currency its value. And then we have double entry bookkeeping and an accounting system, which is really important to balance assets and liabilities in the monetary system. And then, of course, we have the rate of interest, and that is charged on it. So a monetary system is a system of obligations and promises to pay to each other of assets and liabilities. And that's its joy. It's very different from barter, because if you, for example, own corn, you can do what you like with that corn, and it's only when you choose to lend it to somebody else that you actually engage with others. But in a monetary system, when you save money, you're already in a relationship with others, because the money that you have to save is there as a consequence of credit, and credit is money. And debt is money, therefore, too. So money is credit and debt. Money is I promise to pay. And the thing that's really important to understand is that money is not and never has been a commodity. We've used commodities such as packets of cigarettes, shells, gold and silver to represent, if you like, our promises and the value of our promises and the sincerity of our promises. You can keep this gold as collateral, or these cigarettes or whatever, but the actual promise to pay is based on trust. And the way I like to describe it is that in the old days, if you think of a village in the old days living pretty self-sufficiently, if I wanted someone to cut my hair, the hairdresser would say, well, yeah, I'll cut your hair, but would you please fix the thatch in my roof, because I'm no good at thatching. So I don't exchange hair for thatch or thatch for hair. Instead, I say, yes, sure, I'll fix your thatch, but please cut my hair. And what happens next, I do beg your pardon, is that the chief of the village, or the high priest, oversees this arrangement and upholds that promise, says, well, now you've had your hair cut, now you have to honor your obligation. You have a liability to the thatcher. You've got to honor that obligation and do the thatching. And that process of honoring those obligations and those liabilities, and the institution that upholds it, in the case of the village, it was the chief. Today, it's our judicial system, it's our central bank, and so on. Those institutions are what make our promises meaningful. And that is what makes it possible for there effectively not to be any limit to the amount of money in the economy. As long as you and I can promise to do something for each other, we are limited only in our capacity to do that, not in our capacity to make promises. Now, having said that, people will say, oh, this is all highly abstract. You know, my experience of money is that it's, pounds in my pocket and so on. But in fact, all money, in fact, nearly something I imagine about 98% of all money at the moment is not tangible stuff. Very few young people today seem to use coins and notes. They all go about with a little card which they wave at a machine in the newsagents when they pay for their newspapers. And so what's happening there is a transaction, and it doesn't involve necessarily notes and coins. But having said that, although money is this series of transactions, we do have something called the currency, and the currency is something that is issued only by, for example, the central bank, the Bank of England, and the central bank upholds the value of that currency so that I can measure the value of my haircut against your thatching process. And it does so effectively through taxation, because it makes us all pay our taxes in the money of account, in the currency. That is what gives the currency, sterling or the dollar or the yen, its value. If I live in a poor country where there are poor tax collection systems, where there's corruption and there isn't a judicial system, there is no money. And that is because the currency will have no value, will have little value, will be undervalued, and there won't be institutions that enable us to fulfill these promises, these social contracts between us. And so there is no money. So I hope I've been able to distill into these few minutes some concept of what money is. And it is certainly not barter, and it is certainly not gold or silver or whatever. And I think the way people can think about it is to think about a credit card. Whenever you go into a shop with your credit card, you know that there's no money in the credit card account. It's not like your current account where you may have a deposit and some balances. There's no money in your credit card when you go to spend. You hand over your credit card and you purchase an item, and the credit card doesn't stay with the shopkeeper. You pick it up and put it back in your pocket. It's the means by which you measure the value of something, and it's the means by which you undertake a purchase or a transaction.
So we've got this social construct, we've got these promises, as you say, it's almost underpinned by currency. It sounds like that's a system that works. Is it fair to say that system is okay, or are there some fundamental issues? Has it maybe morphed out of what it was previously designed to do? Where's the control of that system?
Well, this is the point. In the very old days, the chief in the village managed those relationships and ensured that, I did not overpromise to thatch the roof and then was not able to fulfill that promise. Because if that happened, you'd start to get real tensions rise where someone had an obligation that they failed to meet. So we've always had to have a system of regulation, of managing these arrangements in order to keep them in some sort of equilibrium and balance, in order to keep relationships in the village stable. And what has gone wrong with our monetary system is that economists and theorists said, money is a commodity. It's like gold. Let it determine its own price. Let it manage itself in the way that gold does. Supply and demand will do the trick. The invisible hand, laissez-faire. These are all concepts used to misdescribe our monetary system, and therefore to say, it doesn't need oversight. It certainly doesn't need democratic regulatory oversight. They can manage themselves. Leave it to the bankers. And that's what the liberalization of finance was all about. That was what deregulation is all about. That is what about the global financial system is all about. It's out there. The players in the capital markets are out there having a wonderful time making loads of money, making promises and obligations, taking bets on these promises and obligations, making more money. And they are beyond the control of our regulatory democracies. And that's why the system has failed periodically and recurringly. And that is why society is so disillusioned with the notion that these self-regulating markets in money, trade and labor must govern us rather than democratic government.
So what happens if nothing changes to that current approach, that current system of money?
I think we can look forward to further financial crises, definitely. They will just keep coming and they'll get worse. And they will be compounded by political crises because society cannot stand being immiserated, if you like, by self-governing, self-regulating financial markets. I read a story last week of a little tea shop in a castle somewhere in Dorset, owned by a family who've owned this little business for 17 years. Now, in the world of global finance, the financiers argued, money must flow across borders without any hindrance, and, we should be able to do as we please. And so what happened was the council put out the contract for this little tea shop to tender. And in swooped an American company worth $15 billion. And, of course, the little minnow, that was the tea shop owner, had no chance at all of competing with the shark that was the global corporation. And that global corporation wasn't a British corporation or Dorset corporation. It had nothing to do with the local community. It was a big global behemoth, which then, of course, swallowed up the tiny minnow that was the Dorset tea shop. So that's what happens when you allow the financial sector to get control of our system of money and of promises and to if you like, take all of the assets associated with that system to themselves and dump a fair amount of the liabilities on the rest of us. So in Dorset, the liability is unemployment for that family and probably for their employees, And probably for the community is going to be pretty fed up. They've loved this company. They've been coming here for years. It's going to change. It's not going to provide the service they had before. There's going to be a general loss, and that loss will fall on the Dorset community, and the owners of the capital will run away with the assets, with the gains.
It's obviously not the outcome I think we as society want to see from a money system, but as you say, that's one example. I hear various examples where similar things happen. What can change? What's the alternative? How can we use the money system and improve the money system to meet the real needs of society?
Well, two things can change. One, we can get, dictators and protectionists to take control of the monetary system, and they'll do all kinds of awful things to the system and to us in the process. That's one choice, and it does seem to me as if some societies are going down that road, calling for a strong man to protect them from these invisible and unaccountable market forces. On the other hand, we could go in a different direction. We could do what we learned to do after the last great financial crisis in the 1920s and 30s. We learned that we had to manage the financial system. We couldn't treat it as if it was gold or silver. We had to understand that this is a system of intangible promises which can be badly exploited by creditors and used to harm debtors, and used to build up masses of liabilities, masses of obligations that are never fulfilled. In other words, mountains of debt. So we learned from that crisis to subordinate the finance sector to the role of servant to the financial system and not masters of the financial system. And this, of course, happened in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. And the Bretton Woods Conference is so fascinating. It was, of course, dominated by John Maynard Keynes and White, the U.S. Treasury's representatives, Harry Dexter White. But Roosevelt refused to allow any banker or financier to attend that conference. The only people present were economists, not just from the rich world, but from the poor world as well. And they sat around a table and they said, what is a rational financial system? And what would be a fairer financial system? And furthermore, what would be a financial system that would prevent the crises we had in the 1920s and 30s and the catastrophic world war that followed? And they came up with the Bretton Woods system. Now, we can't do it in exactly the same way as they prescribed then, but actually they gave us all the tools we need to do what they did then. And then what happened between 45 and 1971 is that we had what most economists define as a golden age in economics, a period of stability, a period of growth, even while it was very slow getting started after the war, and a period of prosperity for most of the world. Since 1971, we've had endless recurring crises, and I could list them all, but I won't trouble you with them. So the answer is managing flows of finance, managing credit creation, managing the mobility of capital across borders so that it doesn't go crazy and do what it did to the tea shop in Dorset, managing the creation of credit so we don't lend money for speculation. Banks only lend money for productive activity. And thirdly, managing the rate of interest so that banks don't impose usury. They don't charge extraordinarily higher rates of interest than there will ever be the capacity to repay. If in asking me to thatch your roof, you say that you're going to charge me a rate of interest because I might take a day or two to do that, which will bankrupt me, and strip me of all the tools that I need to thatch your roof, I'm not going to thatch your roof, and the liability will remain outstanding, and I will be out of a job, and you will have a broken roof. This is the consequence of not managing the relationships between debtors and creditors.
Can we still trust economists, at least conventional economists, to fix the system? It seems to me that recently we've had a great deal of confidence lost in traditional economics. We've had a failure, a widespread failure, with some notable exceptions, yourself included, to identify the coming global financial crisis. More recently, I think we've had an overstated short-term reaction to Brexit from mainstream economists. So are economists the answer?
Well, I'm afraid not. I mean, they are the mainstream and the bulk of economists are trained in the system of economics, which has a big blind spot for the monetary system. And it's really hard for them to emerge from that training. And partly what happened as a part of this detaching economics from the real world was that economics has become more mathematical and more abstract and more based on abstract models than it was ever in its history, when actually these social relationships are not mathematical relationships necessarily. These relationships are social relationships, and they have to be understood in both cultural and political terms and so on. And economics has sort of hived itself off into a mathematical corner trying to be physics. And it's not even very good physics as far as I can see. So, there are many brilliant economists out there, and I have learned a great deal from them. So it's not fair of me to paint them all with the same brush. But there is a very serious crisis at the heart of economics. And I think, when the Queen asked why nobody predicted this, the economists shrugged that off and said, well, of course, we're complicated, blah. But it's now harder for them to shrug off their treatment of the Brexit debate. It's a profession in crisis, and I think finally the profession is beginning to wake up to the scale of that crisis. But it's too late for the rest of us, trying to run businesses or buy homes or get our kids through university. It's too late for those people who are trying to make a living in this chaotic world. And so what they're doing is they're turning to people like Donald Trump for protection.
And you mentioned earlier one possible route we could take would be to turn to a dictator or a protectionist, and Donald Trump is obviously an example of that. I wanted to ask you about the current system seems to be very male-dominated. It's often quite sexist. Are women better positioned than men when it comes to reclaiming control over the production and distribution of money?
I've no evidence to prove that, because women have never really been in charge of the system. But I think women have more of a connection to the real world by their very nature and by the fact of their reproductive abilities, which would make them a little more sensible than many of the crazy men in charge of Wall Street and at the City of London. We've seen how they've been charged with fraud and with, extravagant. We've just had the HBOS scandal and all that reckless behavior there. But I don't think either men or women could manage the system without having a framework of values, ethics, and regulation within which to work. I think women will probably be better placed at establishing that framework of ethics and fairness, because women have been treated very unjustly by the financial system. Everything that women consider important, like childcare, care of the elderly, women's health, maternal care, these are all underfunded, and these are all under-resourced, and we're always told there's not enough money. There's not enough money to look after old ladies and gentlemen in social care, and there's not enough money to save mothers from dying in childbirth, which they still do in very large numbers. There's not enough money, blah. And reality, there is never a shortage of money in a well-managed monetary system. The question is, who is in control of that money? And honestly, I'm biased, of course, I would prefer to see women in charge of a well-regulated, well-managed financial system, which ensures that credit and debt is allocated, if not always fairly. Life is not a bunch of roses, really, but is always allocated on the basis of whether or not the money is repayable, whether or not the debts will generate income, whether or not the investment is in some productive activity that will create employment and generate income, or whether it's engaged instead in what the boys like to do, which is speculation, gambling, taking a shot at something and making a quick buck effortlessly. I think women would be more concerned with the former arrangement than with the latter arrangement. But I am biased, as I say.
I think it's a fair bias. I've certainly seen plenty of studies to suggest that men are risk takers, relative to women. So I think everything you said there is quite right. And may I just ask you one last question, which is, you mentioned earlier, money is not a commodity. I keep coming across individuals who we term gold bugs. So they're often very passionate about gold and believe it's the answer to everything. It's a measurement of wealth. It's a really good investment. What's behind that rise in gold's popularity, gold bugs, and the presence of gold bugs? And do you think they've got a point?
No, I don't think they've got a point. I think they're quite dangerous, actually. The point is that what they want is security, stability, and safety. And gold has all of that, all those qualities. And gold is scarce and is precious, and they feel they can hang on to it. But the great thing about our monetary system, if our monetary system was based on gold, we would have to restrict the amount of activity in the economy to the amount of gold in the vaults of the banks. And we know, and I know because I grew up in a gold mining town, that there are finite supplies of gold. But we have infinite wants and needs. We need to, for example, prepare prepare our societies for climate change, and that will require complete transformation of our economy away from fossil fuels. That's going to cost money, right? That is going to be expensive. There is not enough gold in the world to pay for that, even if you were able to chip that gold into little tiny bits and share it out. So, this is a bit of a fetish, gold, I'm afraid. But people feel about it as they feel about security. And the more insecure we become, the more they want to attach themselves to something that's secure. But they are very wrong. And I had this debate with Jim Rickards the other day, who's a gold bug, to pretend that gold is money. It's never been money. It's not money. It's something that you might have as collateral to say that you're worth a bit. You've got collateral in the bank. You've got gold in the bank, or you may have a Van Gogh in the bank, or you might have a Maserati in the bank, so to speak. That all tells people that you're worth something and you're worth doing business with. But that's all it is. It's a kind of collateral. So I'm afraid it's very misleading. But it comes from this whole theory of money as barter and of money as a commodity, which is so wrong. And, it's been wrong since 1705. John Law, who's the great Scottish economist, knew back in 1705 that money was not a commodity or like a commodity. It was not the thing for which we exchange goods and services. It's the thing by which we exchange goods and services. And, we can't exchange goods and services with gold, because there ain't enough of it for all the goods and services there are in the world.
Anne, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being a guest on Informed Choice Radio. Can you just let us know, where can our listeners buy a copy of your new book, and how can they find out more about you?
Right. Well, I have a website, primeeconomics.org, and it's Prime Economics with 2 E's in the middle, .org. And Verso is the publisher, and I'm pretty sure they've got it on Amazon by now. I'm been a bit slow catching up with them, but I think they have. But certainly you can get it from the Verso website, VERSO, and it's called The Production of Money.
Thank you very much. We'll make sure we put links to those in the show notes for this episode. It is on Amazon. I've checked this morning. I hope it goes very well, and I wish you all the best with your debate at the London School of Economics too.
Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you to Anne for appearing as a guest on Informed Choice Radio today. The money system is something we often take for granted, but it's so fundamental to our economy and our daily lives. Economists like Anne are increasingly questioning the current system and searching for better alternatives. What was your favourite part of that conversation? Let me know on Twitter @MartinBamford, or in the comments section in the show notes for this episode at icradio.co.uk. That's also where you can find useful links and the full transcript for this episode. Don't forget also to say a quick thank you to Anne on Twitter. You can find her there at Ann Pettifor. I'd also love your review of Informed Choice Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. Just visit icradio.co.uk/iTunes or icradio.co.uk/Stitcher. That will take you straight to our pages where you can leave your rating and review. Thank you for listening to this episode, and thank you for your continued support of this podcast. Until next time, I've been Martin Bamford, and this has been Informed Choice Radio. And remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.